This isn't a shelter, it's a VIP lounge. Take your hoodie, your earbuds, and go wait at your gate like everyone else." The words hit harder than any shove. They weren't whispered. They were delivered loud and crisp, like an announcement. Naomi Sinclair froze. She was still gripping her boarding pass. Business class, flight to Nairobi, stamped by the UN Foundation. But to the woman standing in front of her, none of that mattered. The woman's name tag said Marla Quinn, and her crisp navy uniform looked ironed into her bones. Her arms were crossed. Her voice was steel. Her eyes? Pure judgment. Before we dive deeper into this shocking story, tell us where you're watching from today. And if you've ever witnessed someone being humiliated just for how they looked, hit like and subscribe, because what happens next will flip everything you expect. Naomi was 16. Her hair was neatly braided, her posture relaxed but respectful. She wore the gray hoodie her mother had bought her 3 years ago, still warm, still whole. She wasn't making a statement. She just wanted somewhere quiet to wait for her connecting flight. But as soon as she stepped into the lounge, with its polished walnut furniture, thick carpet, and the unmistakable aroma of espresso, she had become a problem. "A hoodie?" Marla repeated, louder now, addressing no one and everyone. "We're not running a community center here." Naomi calmly held out her boarding pass. "I have a valid ticket, Gate C22 business class." Marla didn't take it. Instead, she took a step forward, tilting her head like Naomi was an exhibit. "That looks printed. You could have made this at a school library." Naomi blinked. "It's from the UN Foundation." Marla raised a single eyebrow. "You think a handout from some charity entitles you to sit where diplomats do?" Now passengers were watching. A man in a tailored suit glanced up over his glasses. A couple in first-class attire looked away, awkward. Someone further back pulled out their phone. Slowly. Naomi said nothing. She had been here before, with her father, a man who spoke 8 languages and wore every room like it belonged to him. Back then, in a blazer and dress shoes, she'd sat in this exact lounge and no one had blinked. But today, alone, in a hoodie, she was suddenly a security risk, a branding issue. "You need to leave before I involve airport security," Marla snapped, voice sharper now. "Because loitering in restricted lounges can get you flagged." Naomi didn't move. She didn't argue. She tucked her boarding pass back into her hoodie pocket, lifted her chin, and walked out. She found a hard-backed seat near a vending machine. The quiet here was different. No clinking cups, no hushed conversations in different dialects. Just the buzz of a flickering overhead light. She pulled off her headphones, not because she was listening to anything, but because the silence in her head was louder. How many times had she watched her father shake hands with people like Marla, mediating, translating, smoothing over miscommunications between entire governments? And now, here she was, being treated like a trespasser, not because of who she was, but because of what she wore, because she didn't look expensive enough. Naomi didn't cry. She wasn't raised to cry in public. She internalized, she observed, she remembered. Every comment, every glance, every condescending word pretending to be policy. She collected them like a scientist collecting samples, and someday, she knew, she'd use every single one of them. Back in the lounge, the espresso machines hissed. People went back to pretending they hadn't seen anything. But in less than 10 minutes, the very room that had rejected her was going to be thrust into the center of an international misunderstanding. And Naomi Sinclair, the girl in the hoodie, was the only one who could fix it. Naomi sat still in the molded plastic chair near Gate 14, her gray hoodie hood halfway up, hands loosely folded in her lap. The hum of flight announcements echoed around her, but she wasn't listening, not really. Her mind was already drifting, back to a different airport, a different lounge, a different version of her. She was 9 years old, the first time she entered a VIP terminal. Not as a guest, not even as a daughter, just a shadow, trailing behind her father. Gregory Sinclair, interpreter to presidents. The man who could make 5 people from 5 continents laugh at the same joke, in their own language. Naomi remembered watching him switch from French to Arabic to Russian without hesitation. The words flowed like music from his mouth. People leaned in when he spoke, not because he was loud, but because he was precise, calm, trusted. And Naomi, in her little blazer and shiny shoes, used to think, if I just stay quiet and learn enough words, maybe people will look at me that way too. But today, no one had leaned in. They'd looked away. Her mother once said, "Language isn't just words, Naomi. It's how you tell the world. I see you. I understand you. You matter." Her mother would have had words for that lounge woman. Academic words. Sharp ones. Delivered in 4 languages, probably. But Naomi had inherited her father's quiet. The kind that collected data and didn't react until it absolutely had to. And now, all she could think about was the way Marla Quinn had looked at her. Like she was static on a perfect screen. Like her presence alone was an error in the algorithm of first-class comfort. Marla didn't know. Didn't know about the conferences, the scholarships. Didn't know Naomi had helped translate a Swahili press conference at the African Union Forum when she was 13, because their assigned interpreter fell ill. Didn't know she could code switch faster than most politicians could blink. All Marla had seen was hoodie, skin, headphones, and all she had decided was unworthy. Naomi pulled out her phone, not to scroll, but to stare. The screen reflected her face, dark eyes, still too young to intimidate anyone. She swiped up and opened the last photo her grandfather had sent before he passed. It was a scanned page from one of his notebooks. Fluency means freedom. Maxwell Sinclair, founder of World Literacy Alliance. Her grandfather had spent his life building a global education fund now supporting thousands of language programs across 47 countries. She remembered sitting in his study, tracing the countries on his office globe as he whispered greetings in 10 different tongues. And now his granddaughter, his favorite granddaughter he used to tease, had been told to leave a lounge. Not a school, not a nightclub. A lounge her family had helped fund, indirectly, for over a decade through diplomatic partnerships. The irony felt cruel, but also familiar. The boarding gate screen flickered as a flight to Zurich started boarding. Naomi sat still. She didn't check her watch. She didn't glance at the lounge behind her. Instead, she started translating in her head, a nervous habit, her version of biting nails. Portuguese, I have a boarding pass. French, you must be mistaken. Arabic, I belong here. She whispered them under her breath like a chant, a shield, a spell. 10 languages if you counted Latin, which she did, even if no one else cared. Her father once joked that Naomi wasn't a daughter, she was a portable UN desk. But right now, none of that mattered. Because inside the VIP lounge, just beyond the frosted glass, something was unraveling. The Brazilian delegation had arrived early. Their translator had not. The wrong message was spreading. Words were being misread, misquoted. Naomi could hear the early signs. Raised voices, hesitant footsteps, an urgent call for assistance over the intercom. And even now, seated in a hoodie and sneakers, Naomi could feel the familiar tingle in her chest. That moment when everything that made her different suddenly became necessary. She stood up slowly, pocketed her phone, and adjusted her hoodie. The countdown had started. Not for her revenge, but for her voice. And she wasn't going to waste either. From her seat near Gate 14, Naomi could hear the tone shift before she could see the cause. The once quiet VIP lounge had grown louder. Voices raised, a burst of fast Portuguese, then a clipped response in heavily accented English. Something was off. Naomi stood. She moved quietly toward the glass partition separating the lounge from the rest of the terminal. From this angle, she could see past the frosted band in the middle. A group of suited passengers, 4 men, 1 woman, stood near the espresso bar, visibly frustrated. One of them waved a document in the air. 2 staff members hovered nearby, nervous but clearly out of their depth. No translator. No bridge. Naomi's pulse ticked up. She recognized the green and yellow lapel pins, Brazilian Ministry of Education. She stepped closer until she could hear more. "We were told someone would greet us," a woman said in thick accented English. "This is not what was agreed." A man beside her tried to clarify something in Portuguese, but the staff nodded blankly. Wrong words were being used, intentions were being misread, and fast. Naomi adjusted her hoodie and stepped toward the entrance. Inside, Marla Quinn stood by the podium, arms still crossed like before, scanning the crowd. As Naomi reached the rope divider, Marla clocked her immediately. "You again?" she said, loud enough to be heard 2 rows back. Naomi didn't blink. "There's a misunderstanding happening inside," she said evenly. "I speak Portuguese." Marla smirked. "Oh, you speak now? Thought you only stared holes through people." She stepped forward, blocking Naomi's path. "And let me guess, you'd just love to walk in there and play hero." Naomi's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. "I'm trying to help. That delegation is here for an educational partnership. If this goes south, it won't just be a scheduling error. It'll be a diplomatic headline." Marla leaned in, eyes sharp. "You think anyone in there is going to take advice from a teenager in a hoodie? You're embarrassing yourself." Naomi inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Then, behind Marla, a voice cut in. "Desculpa, é você, Naomi?" Naomi looked up. A man from the Brazilian group had stepped forward, holding a folder in one hand. His eyes squinted with surprise, then lit up with recognition. "Da conferência em Genebra, 3 anos atrás? From the Geneva Conference, 3 years ago?" Naomi nodded. "Sim, senhor. Eu estava lá com meu pai." "Yes, sir. I was there with my father." Marla turned, confused by the exchange. "What's going on?" The man extended his hand. "Naomi Sinclair. She helped translate for our delegation when the scheduled interpreter missed a panel." He looked at Marla. "She speaks fluently. Portuguese, French, Swahili, and I think she did Arabic too." Naomi could feel the heat in Marla's face even before she said a word. "I'll walk in with her," the man said, "if that's the concern." Marla hesitated. For a second, she looked like she wanted to protest, then glanced over and saw the other guests watching. One had even pulled out a phone. Again, she stepped aside, stiffly. "Fine, but don't make a scene." Naomi didn't respond. She just nodded once and stepped past her. Inside, the tension was thick. 2 Brazilian delegates had resorted to using Google Translate on their phones. One had a hand on his suitcase like he was ready to leave. Naomi walked straight to the group and spoke clearly, calmly, in Portuguese. "Desculpe a confusão. Houve problema com o tradutor designado, mas posso ajudar." "I apologize for the confusion. There was an issue with the assigned translator, but I can assist." Heads turned, eyes widened. Within seconds, the posture in the group shifted, brows unfurrowed. Someone cracked a small joke in Portuguese about American efficiency, and Naomi responded in kind. Laughter. Tension released like air from a valve. Behind her, Marla lingered near the wall, arms stiff at her sides. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. Naomi had already said enough, in 3 languages. By the time she helped them find the proper documents, explain a luggage delay, and confirm tomorrow's agenda, Naomi wasn't the girl in the hoodie anymore. She was the only person in that room who knew what the hell she was doing. And the irony? She hadn't even needed her boarding pass to prove it. Naomi didn't walk into the VIP lounge like she belonged there. She walked in like someone who had been told, twice, that she didn't. But now, no one said a word. The Brazilian delegate who'd recognized her walked beside her like a quiet endorsement. The air shifted as she entered. People turned, not just out of curiosity, but because something about her presence told them, finally, someone who gets it. The group she approached was flustered. Documents were still being misunderstood. Two of the Brazilian reps were gesturing at a screen showing the wrong agenda. A woman from Morocco looked deeply uncomfortable, phone in hand, trying to translate on an app. Naomi spoke first in Portuguese, clear, measured, calm. Perdão pela confusão. Eu posso ajudar a esclarecer tudo isso. I apologize for the confusion. I can help clarify everything. One of the men blinked. You speak Portuguese? She nodded. And French, Arabic, English, Swahili, if you need. For a moment, there was only stillness. Then, movement. The Moroccan delegate's eyes lit up. Vous parlez français aussi? Naomi turned to her immediately, switching tones and rhythm without hesitation. Oui, madame. Je peux tout expliquer. Il y a eu une erreur de coordination. Mais rien de grave. Yes, ma'am. I can explain everything. There was a coordination error, but nothing serious. You could feel the room exhale. The tension melted from shoulders, jaws unclenched, hands lowered from screens. In less than 30 seconds, Naomi was commanding the room, not by force, but by fluency. Not with a title, not with a badge, just with ability. Near the wall, Marla Quinn stood frozen. She wasn't close enough to interrupt, but not far enough to disappear. Her arms were folded, but her knuckles had gone pale. She watched Naomi navigate 3 languages effortlessly, watched delegates nod and lean in, watched the same girl she dismissed, humiliated, now being asked follow-up questions by people twice her age in 3 different tongues. Marla glanced to her left and caught sight of a young man near the bar with his phone pointed toward the scene. Filming. Her stomach dropped. Naomi, meanwhile, had shifted to Arabic. She was helping the Moroccan official locate a shipment of educational materials stuck in customs. Then she pulled up an email to cross-check the delivery codes, all while seamlessly responding to a joke in French from the Brazilian rep, who now looked visibly relieved. One of the catering staff quietly offered her a bottle of water. She declined with a soft smile and a small nod, still translating mid-sentence. She wasn't just helping. She was holding the entire moment together. A few feet away, Marla took one cautious step back. Someone else, an older guest, gave her a sideways look, noticing, remembering. Marla looked toward the exit, but didn't move. After about 15 minutes, Naomi gently closed the conversation with a polished, "We'll follow up by email. Thank you for your patience," said in English, French, and Portuguese. As the delegates turned to gather their belongings, the Brazilian official touched her elbow gently and said, "You may have saved our entire morning." Naomi just nodded. "I'm glad I could help." One of the other delegates asked for her name. She answered plainly, no flourish. "Naomi Sinclair." There was a beat. One of them mouthed it again, like they were filing it away, like they'd heard that name before. As she stepped back toward the edge of the room, Naomi passed Marla. Their eyes met. Just briefly. Naomi didn't stop. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Marla looked away first. Back at her seat near the gate, Naomi sat down and exhaled. The room hadn't applauded. There were no cheers. But she didn't need any of that. What she'd earned wasn't noise. It was notice. And in this world, that was louder than anything. Naomi left the VIP lounge the same way she entered it, quietly. No spotlight, no dramatic exit, just calm steps and a bottle of water now lukewarm in her hand. She walked past the espresso bar, past the concierge desk, past Marla Quinn, who, for once, didn't have anything to say. No apology, no thank you, just silence. The same kind Naomi had given her earlier. Outside the glass doors, the hallway felt cooler, wider, like the space itself knew she needed room to breathe. She didn't look back. Back at gate 14, Naomi took her seat again near the window. The sun had shifted since she first sat there, casting new shadows across the floor. She pulled out her book, a worn copy of Interpreter of Maladies, and opened to the page she hadn't touched since before the lounge incident. But the words wouldn't hold. Her mind replayed the sounds inside that room. The tension, the pause when she spoke, the change in posture, the laughter that followed. Not because she was funny, but because she was fluent. Because when people feel understood, they relax, and that had nothing to do with age or titles or outfits. 30 feet away, near the cafe, a young gate agent named Jasmine was scrolling through her phone during her break. She wasn't supposed to be on social media, but she checked anyway, just a habit. She tapped into a closed airline staff forum and stopped mid-swipe when she saw the thumbnail. A grainy but clear shot of the VIP lounge. The caption read, "Kid in a hoodie just saved a one-beater conference. Anyone know her?" She hit play. The video wasn't long, 47 seconds, but it captured everything. Naomi stepping into frame, calm, speaking Portuguese, then French, explaining something on a phone screen. The moment the room exhaled, Jasmine blinked. "Wait, she's not staff?" She turned the volume down, glanced around, then texted a friend who worked upstairs. By the time Naomi's boarding group was called for her Nairobi flight, the video had made its way to 3 internal chat groups, 1 cabin crew forum, and a senior manager in corporate affairs. 10 minutes later, Marla Quinn's phone buzzed. Unknown caller, internal line. She hesitated, answered. "Marla, it's Robert from Guest Services Management. Can you step into the admin office before your next assignment?" Her voice caught. "Yeah, of course. Right away." "Now, please, bring your incident log." Marla knew what this was about. It wasn't official yet, but she'd seen the way people looked at her when she left the lounge. Not with respect, with caution. She walked stiffly through the back corridor, past catering carts and baggage offices. She didn't check her reflection, didn't check her tone. She just kept walking. In the admin office, Robert was waiting with a tablet and a printed report. Without looking up, he tapped the screen. "Can you confirm this is you on the timestamp 10:37 a.m.? She leaned in. It was her, blocking the entrance, and Naomi, standing calmly, holding her boarding pass. The audio was low but clear enough. Marla swallowed. Robert finally looked up. "She's 16. You turned her away in front of guests. Then again, minutes later, with no documented policy violation on her part." Marla opened her mouth. "I was following protocol." "You made a scene. She solved one." The silence between them stretched. Meanwhile, back at the gate, Naomi stood at the boarding lane. She handed over her pass without a word. The attendant smiled, warmly this time. A small shift, but Naomi noticed it. As she walked down the jet bridge, someone tapped her shoulder. She turned. It was a young woman from earlier, the Moroccan delegate. She pressed a folded slip of paper into Naomi's hand. "Thank you," she said, in lightly accented English. "You reminded us what real diplomacy looks like." Naomi smiled, tucked the note in her pocket, and continued toward the plane. Somewhere above gate level in a quiet HR office, 2 supervisors were drafting a formal letter. "Effective immediately, flight staff member Marla Quinn will be placed under review pending investigation of behavior unbecoming of a lead customer experience role." No one would say it was about the hoodie. No one would write racial bias on the file. But the footage said more than enough. As the plane pulled away from the gate, Naomi looked out the window. She didn't know about the video, the forums, the internal buzz. She only knew that today, she had stepped up when it mattered. And sometimes, that was enough. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and exhaled. Meanwhile, in a break room miles away, 2 gate agents huddled over a phone. One whispered, "You think she's someone important?" The other shrugged. "I don't know, but I know this. She didn't walk in there to prove anything." A pause. "She just was." Naomi stepped off the plane and into the warm air of Nairobi just past 7 o'clock a.m. The sky was soft with early light, the air calm and dry. She held her small carry-on tight and followed the signs through Jomo Kenyatta International like she'd done this before. But this time, everything felt different. Not because someone greeted her at the gate. No one did. Not because she expected attention. She didn't. But because there was a shift inside her. Back home, someone was probably still talking about what happened in that lounge. Somewhere, that video was still circulating. And Marla? Naomi didn't know. Didn't need to. She hadn't flown here to prove anything. She was here for something bigger. At the arrival area, she spotted a small sign held by a young man in a black vest. UNESCO, Education Conference. Guest, Naomi Sinclair. He seemed surprised when she walked up. "You're Naomi?" She nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked like he was about to ask something, then just gestured politely. "Cars this way." In the back seat of the modest black sedan, Naomi took a breath and looked out the window. The city stretched wide, traffic humming, people walking with purpose, roadside stands opening to the day. Nairobi was alive. And so was she. They drove in silence for 20 minutes until they reached a mid-rise hotel with a large silver sign. Aluma Conference Center. Inside, a woman in a navy blazer greeted her at the desk. "Welcome, Miss Sinclair. We have your credentials ready." She handed Naomi a small badge with her name and a ribbon beneath it. Youth Representative. Linguistic Access Panel. Naomi blinked. "I'm on a panel." The woman smiled. "Weren't you notified?" She hadn't, but she didn't say that. Instead, she took the badge and nodded quietly. "Thank you." Upstairs, the room was simple. Clean sheets, a desk, a glass of welcome tea. Naomi didn't unpack. She sat by the window, letting the steam rise from the cup. Outside, she could hear distant laughter. Somewhere, young people were already checking in, registering, preparing to speak. She should have felt nervous, but instead, she felt steady, like her path was finally meeting her pace. That afternoon, a soft knock came at her door. Naomi opened it to find a woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled into a bun, a scarf draped over her shoulder, eyes that sparkled with mischief and warmth. "Naomi Sinclair?" she asked. Naomi nodded. The woman stepped in, extended her hand. "I'm Dr. Lillian Okoye, Vice Chair of the International Literacy Coalition." Naomi shook her hand. "It's an honor to meet you." "Oh, the honor's mine, dear. I saw a clip of you on that airline video." Naomi froze. Lillian smiled gently. "Don't worry. I'm not here to talk about that. I'm here because I've heard of you long before that video. Your grandfather trained me when I was barely older than you." Naomi's eyes widened. "You knew Max Sinclair?" "I did. He called you his little miracle. Said you understood syntax before you could spell your last name." Naomi laughed, her eyes misting. "He used to say that." Lillian touched her arm. "I don't know what happened back in the US, but I do know this. You've inherited more than talent. You've inherited timing, and timing," she said with a wink, "is everything." The next morning, Naomi stood backstage, her badge now clipped to her blazer. The youth panel was part of the opening session. 3 young speakers sharing stories of access, equity, and language barriers in education. She was second. The first speaker, a student from Tunisia, shared her story in Arabic and French, her voice firm, her message clear. "We don't need pity. We need partnerships." When Naomi stepped onto the stage, the lights didn't feel too bright. She glanced at the crowd. Diplomats, educators, NGO leaders, people who made decisions, people who changed policies. She adjusted the microphone. "I'm not here to impress anyone," she began. "I'm here because words saved me." She told the story of growing up in a house where words were currency, how her father taught her language wasn't just communication, it was dignity, How her mother taught her silence could be strategic. How her grandfather told her fluency wasn't just about accents, but access. She didn't mention Marla, or the lounge, or the humiliation. She didn't have to. When you give a child the tools to speak, you give them more than a voice. You give them permission to belong. When she finished, the room was still. Then the applause came. Not thunderous, but deep, genuine. Some stood, and backstage, Dr. Okoye wiped her glasses and whispered, "Max would have been proud." Naomi just smiled, eyes glassy but unbroken. Later that evening, Naomi was invited to a private roundtable, a small room of 12 people, mostly senior leaders from UNESCO, UNICEF, and education ministries across Africa and Asia. She was the only teenager. She didn't speak much at first, just listened, took notes. Then a man from the Ethiopian Ministry of Education asked a question about rural language support in refugee settlements. And Naomi, without overthinking it, answered in soft, fluent Amharic. The room shifted again. People leaned in. Questions redirected to her. She didn't pitch herself. She simply responded. Thoughtfully. Clearly. By the end of the night, she'd received 3 requests for follow-up meetings, 2 invitations to visit national programs, and 1 direct offer to join an international working group on digital language access. She hadn't asked for any of it. She'd just shown up, spoken up. Back in her room, Naomi sat cross-legged on the bed, phone in hand. There were messages from her mom, a photo of her dog wearing her hoodie back home, a missed call from her aunt, a note from her school principal saying, "We saw you. The whole school did. You make us proud." But it was the last message that made her pause. It was from an unknown number, just a single sentence. "I used to think people like me didn't belong in places like that. But today, you changed my mind. Thank you." Naomi stared at the words for a long moment. Then she set the phone down and pulled out her journal. She didn't write much, just 1 sentence. It mattered. Then she underlined it. Twice. And finally, she turned off the lights. Not because she was tired, but because tomorrow was coming. And for the first time in a long time, Naomi felt ready for it. Not as someone proving herself, but as someone finally being seen. Marla Quinn stood outside the corporate office on level 6 of Sky North Airlines headquarters, trying not to fidget. Her blouse was pressed, her posture sharp, but her nerves betrayed her, fingertips tapping against the faux leather folder she was told to bring. The invitation, or summons really, had arrived via email 2 days after the Nairobi incident. Subject line, HR04 immediate debrief request. The email had used words like internal review, video circulation, and incident impact analysis. But what caught Marla's breath was the CC line. It included 2 people from public relations, 1 from legal, and someone from the CEO's office. Now, standing in the hall outside the frosted glass doors, she could hear muffled voices. Laughter. Not at her, probably, but still. It stung. She had spent 17 years rising through the ranks, from junior crew to international lead to in-flight training specialist. She knew the manuals, the service codes, the diplomatic greetings by heart. What she didn't know was how fast a single clip, 47 seconds long, could make all of that irrelevant, especially when it showed a girl in a hoodie doing the job better than she had. Inside the meeting room, on the 17th floor, things weren't any quieter. Thomas Ellerby, VP of Global Customer Experience, adjusted his tie and tapped his screen. The video was paused at the 019 mark. Naomi was mid-sentence, calmly explaining an airport miscommunication in Portuguese. Behind her, Marla stood stiffly, clearly trying to keep control. Beside him, Chief People Officer Sandra Nguyen shook her head. "This has crossed departments," she said. "We've received statements of concern from 3 international partners who recognized the girl, including UNESCO." Thomas looked over his glasses. And we confirmed she was holding a valid boarding pass? Sandra nodded. Issued through the UN Foundation, seat 3A. Checked through, scanned, cleared. Then why? A man from legal cut in. Was she removed from the lounge twice? No one answered. Not yet. The door opened. Marla Quinn, reporting as requested, she said briskly. Come in, Thomas replied. Close the door behind you. Marla sat, her folder still clutched in one hand. Thomas didn't waste time. We've reviewed the video, read the staff logs, spoke with 3 passengers who were in the lounge that day. Marla gave a small nod. Then you understand the situation. She didn't appear to meet dress code. She didn't behave like a business class guest. And what does a business class guest behave like, in your view? Sandra asked, not unkindly, but precisely. Marla hesitated. Professionally, polished. She wore a hoodie. She didn't announce herself. Because people with quiet power never do, Thomas said, eyes narrowing. And yet she walked into a diplomatic storm and diffused it in minutes. Marla's voice flattened. She embarrassed the crew. No, Sandra corrected gently. She saved the airline. Thomas clicked a slide on the monitor. It showed an email thread. The subject line, Naomi Sinclair, immediate recommendation for strategic partnership. 2 days ago, he said, we received this from the African Education Roundtable. They're requesting Naomi Sinclair to serve as liaison for a global pilot program in real-time linguistic access. Marla blinked. She's 16, she muttered. She's fluent in 9 languages, and the granddaughter of Maxwell Sinclair. That landed like thunder. Even Marla couldn't hide her reaction. Her eyes flinched just slightly. She knew that name. Everyone in international protocol did. You understand, Sandra said softly, why this is more than a dress code incident? Marla said nothing. We're not here to make you a scapegoat, Thomas added. But we are here to talk about accountability. Because right now, the public sees one thing. A girl you dismissed solved a diplomatic failure with calm, class, and 0 formal authority. There was silence. Then Marla finally said, what happens next? Sandra folded her hands. That depends. On you, on us, on how transparent we're willing to be about what respect looks like in our brand. Thomas closed his folder. There will be a formal review. You'll step back from all public-facing roles, starting immediately. Marla nodded once. Too stiff to show emotion, too proud to push back. But deep inside, something cracked. Meanwhile, across the city, Naomi was on a Zoom call with a small working group from UNICEF. She sat at a corner desk in her hotel room, wearing a soft blue sweater, hair pulled back, a mug of tea steaming beside her. The woman leading the session was describing language challenges in remote schools in Cambodia. Naomi took notes, asked questions, and when called on, offered a potential solution involving digital translation tools. No one treated her like a child. No one asked her age, only what she thought. And in this space, that was everything. Back at Sky North HQ, the internal staff portal posted an update later that evening. Following a review of recent public interactions, Sky North Airlines reaffirms its commitment to dignity, linguistic equity, and respect across all touchpoints. A new cultural access initiative will launch next quarter, shaped in part by insights from youth leaders, including Naomi Sinclair. Beneath it, an internal comment thread began, quietly at first, then faster. That's the girl from the video, right? I was in the lounge. She was calm, smarter than anyone else in the room. This is what representation looks like. Where can we hear her speak again? And somewhere in a break room, a young flight attendant named Sarah scrolled through the post. She didn't know Naomi, had never worked a flight that important. But she saved the article. She sent it to her little sister. You need to read this, she wrote. She looks like you, and she just changed everything. Later that night, as Naomi sat watching the Nairobi skyline blink in soft lights, her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. "My name is Marla Quinn. I was the attendant you met at the airport. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know I see you now, and I was wrong." Naomi stared at the screen for a moment. She didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, she looked out the window and whispered a phrase her grandfather once told her. "Respect never begs to be seen. It just waits, and one day, it's undeniable." Then she smiled and turned the phone over. Tomorrow was coming, and this time, it was coming her way. Naomi stepped off the plane at JFK wearing the same gray hoodie she had worn when everything started. Her carry-on rolled behind her, the sleeves of her conference tote peeking out. UNESCO, UNICEF, the International Literacy Coalition. She moved through immigration with quiet efficiency. No one recognized her. No one needed to. But the moment she walked into the arrival terminal, she felt it. The weight of being known by people she didn't know. Two high school students across the terminal looked up from their phones and nudged each other. "That's her," one whispered. Naomi didn't break stride. She didn't walk faster, didn't lower her eyes, but her chest tightened. The woman at the ride-share counter glanced up, smiled warmly, and said, "Welcome back, Miss Sinclair." Not ma'am, not young lady, just her name. Outside, her mother waited near the curb, arms crossed and eyes full. Not the crying kind of full, but the kind Naomi knew meant everything had changed. "Hey, Ma," she said as the door opened. "You good?" her mother asked, even as she pulled Naomi into a one-armed hug. Naomi nodded. On the ride home, they didn't talk much. Her mom asked about the conference, the food, the weather. She didn't ask about the video, or the airline, or the message from Marla Quinn. And Naomi didn't bring it up. It wasn't silence out of avoidance. It was mutual understanding. Some things didn't need to be relived. Not out loud. At school the next day, Naomi found her locker decorated with a small printed sign. "We speak your name." Someone had drawn 9 flags around it. Languages. Her languages. She didn't know who did it. She didn't ask. That week, she was invited to speak at a statewide education forum in Albany. Not as a student speaker, but as a featured youth advisor. The title on the program read, Naomi Sinclair, Linguistic Equity Advocate. She blinked when she saw it. She hadn't asked for that label, but she didn't flinch from it either. The event was held in a hotel ballroom lined with college banners and folding chairs. Teachers, nonprofit leaders, state board reps, all buzzing about test scores, budgets, and curriculum equity. Naomi sat quietly in the front row with her badge clipped low. She didn't check her phone, she didn't rehearse, she just listened. Then came her turn. The moderator introduced her softly. You've probably seen her name, maybe her face. But today, I hope you listen to her words. Please welcome Naomi Sinclair. The applause was polite, but curious. She walked up slowly, not nervous, not eager. She began, I've been told that what I did overseas was impressive, but let me tell you what impressed me. She talked about the classroom in Kisumu, Kenya, where a teacher with 3 textbooks and 48 students managed to teach in 2 languages. She told the story of a boy who couldn't speak in his own dialect during exams and failed because of it. She shared how a translation wasn't just about converting words. It was about making space, dismantling silence. It was about survival. When you tell a child they can only succeed in one language, you're not teaching them discipline. You're teaching them invisibility. The room shifted. People leaned in. She ended by asking every district to audit their linguistic assumptions, to think not just about access, but about inclusion with dignity. When she stepped down, the applause was longer, slower, but deeper. Not a standing ovation, but something better, respect. That night, a clip of Naomi's speech, filmed by a local teacher, circulated through state educator groups. By morning, 3 districts had scheduled follow-up meetings. 2 nonprofits reached out about grants. A regional superintendent posted the clip with a caption, "The future of education doesn't always come with a title. Sometimes it comes with a truth you can't ignore." Meanwhile, across the country, Marla Quinn sat in her apartment reading news she wasn't tagged in. She'd been moved to a back-office role at Sky North. No customer contact, no uniforms, no more lounges. At first, she'd tried to justify it, policy, protocol, presentation standards, but the noise never stopped. On airline forums, passengers shared stories. One woman posted, "I saw her humiliate a girl in front of diplomats. That girl turned out to be the only one qualified to fix the crisis." And still, Naomi had never spoken her name publicly, never retaliated, never capitalized. That silence haunted Marla more than any headline. She'd written Naomi once, got no reply, but she wrote again. This time, it wasn't an apology. It was a confession. "I didn't know what I was looking at. I just saw what I was told to see. And for that, I'll spend the rest of my career working to make sure others don't repeat that mistake." Back in her bedroom, Naomi reread the message. She didn't delete it, didn't respond either. Instead, she bookmarked it. A quiet archive. Then she opened her laptop, typed the title of her newest essay for school, "Fluency as Resistance," and beneath it, the first line, "This isn't about how I was underestimated. It's about what happens when we stop underestimating each other." That night, Naomi sat by her window, watching the street below buzz with ordinary life. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like the world was too loud or too far. She felt placed, like she belonged to the sound. And the sound finally belonged to her. The email came on a Thursday morning. Naomi was in her school library, helping a freshman find a book on indigenous languages of the Andes, when her phone buzzed softly. She almost ignored it. But the subject line caught her eye. Invitation to appear. Morning America, CBS National. She blinked, then opened it. The message was short, respectful, and clear. A producer had seen the clip from Albany. They wanted Naomi on the show, live, not for sensationalism, but to talk about youth leadership, multilingual inclusion, and why quiet power speaks the loudest. Her stomach tightened. She reread the message, once, twice. Then she quietly excused herself from the library and walked to the back hallway near the language labs. She called her mom. The studio was brighter than anything Naomi had experienced. A makeup artist lightly powdered her cheeks. A stylist offered her a blazer. She declined politely and kept her soft brown cardigan. The host, a warm-eyed woman named Dana Morgan, greeted her off-air. "We're not here to corner you," Dana said. "We just want people to hear what you already made clear. You didn't raise your voice. You raised the bar." Naomi gave a small smile. "I just did what I knew." A minute later, the red light went on. "America," Dana began. "Our next guest didn't plan on going viral. But when a language crisis broke out at an international terminal, she stepped in. Not as staff, not as security, but as a 16-year-old passenger with a gift. Please welcome, from New York, Naomi Sinclair." Naomi looked into the camera, not frozen, not afraid, and spoke. She explained the situation simply. No drama. She didn't name Marla. She didn't need to. She talked about what it meant to feel invisible, to walk into a room and know your ability doesn't look like what they expected. She said, "I wasn't trying to be impressive. I just didn't want the problem to get worse." She talked about her father, her grandfather, her mother, the voices that raised her. She said, "Fluency isn't just about language. It's about understanding the pause between sentences. It's about not mistaking quiet for weakness." Dana's eyes misted slightly. "You speak like someone who's waited a long time to be heard." Naomi didn't flinch. I didn't wait. I just spoke when it mattered. The segment lasted 6 minutes, but by the time it ended, Naomi Sinclair was trending across 3 platforms. That evening, national education reporters picked up the clip. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Student Interpreter Sparks, Conversation on Youth, Bias, and Belonging." Meanwhile, at Sky North headquarters, the reaction was less celebratory. Internal Slack channels lit up with staff asking if leadership had seen the segment. Passengers posted screenshots of Naomi's CBS moment alongside photos of her being denied entry to the VIP lounge. By noon, the airline's public inbox had over 900 messages. Most said the same thing. What is Sky North doing to fix this? By Friday, Sky North's executive board held an emergency session. They weren't responding to one incident. They were responding to a movement. The Cultural Access Initiative Naomi had inspired. It had been buried in drafts, deferred. Now it was back, front and center. Mandatory language equity training for all customer-facing staff. Creation of an internal review committee for bias incidents, guest recognition protocols, inclusive of cultural identity, language, attire. Advisory role offered to Naomi Sinclair, unpaid, legal had insisted. She's still a minor, but the board overruled. They didn't want to tokenize her. They wanted to listen. When Naomi received the offer letter, she didn't celebrate. She read it carefully, quietly. Her mom stood behind her. "You don't have to say yes." Naomi folded the letter once, then again. "I don't want a seat at the table," she said finally. "I want to build the next one." She didn't mean it as a slogan. She meant it like a blueprint. Later that week, Naomi returned to school. No cameras, no podiums. Just a hallway of students she now knew were watching. A freshman girl in a red scarf stopped her by the lockers. "My grandma cried when she saw your interview," she said. She said, "That's our girl." Naomi blinked. "Thank you." Another boy chimed in. "Yo, you're in our civics homework now." Naomi chuckled. "Sorry about that." And across the city, on a quiet Saturday, Marla Quinn walked into a community center where Sky North sponsors a language education program for teens. She wasn't in uniform. She was just there to listen. And when one of the teen leaders finished presenting, in flawless Haitian Creole, Marla stood up. She didn't make a speech. She just said, "Thank you for reminding me how much language holds," and sat back down. Because change doesn't always start loud. Sometimes it starts with one girl, in a hoodie, holding a boarding pass, who speaks 9 languages and still chooses to listen first. Naomi Sinclair hadn't expected to be back in a boardroom so soon, especially not on the 32nd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, inside the headquarters of the very airline that once told her she didn't belong. She smoothed her blazer, checked the badge clipped to her lapel, visitor, special guest, and followed the assistant down a long corridor lined with photos of planes, milestones, and executive handshakes. Not one of those faces looked like hers, but that was, apparently, why she'd been invited. The assistant stopped at a door of frosted glass. "They're ready for you." Naomi nodded once, exhaled quietly, and stepped in. The room smelled like fresh carpet and corporate coffee. 13 people sat around a long oak table. Department heads, PR reps, HR directors, and legal advisors. All eyes turned to her. She met them evenly. Thomas Ellerby, VP of Global Customer Experience, stood up and gestured to the seat beside him. "Naomi," he said, with a tone both rehearsed and respectful. "Thank you for making time today." She sat down slowly. "Thanks for the invitation." Sandra Nguyen from HR offered a smile across the table. Others followed. Some nodded. Some didn't. On the screen at the end of the table, Cultural Access Initiative, Phase 1, Internal Review and Strategy. Naomi took a deep breath. She wasn't nervous. Not anymore. but she was ready. Thomas began. As many of you know, Naomi's recent experience and her quiet leadership sparked global attention. But more importantly, it exposed gaps in our systems, in how we recognize value, in how we handle moments that can define our brand. He turned to Naomi. Before we dive in, would you like to share anything with the group? She looked around, some faces curious, some cautious. Yes, she said. I do. She reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder. But before I share ideas, I want to ask one question. She paused. When you saw that video, what did you see? Silence. People shifted in their chairs. A few looked down. No one answered. Then Sandra spoke. I saw someone solve a crisis in a language our staff didn't speak, calmly, without a badge. Another executive added, I saw a 16-year-old lead better than most adults. Someone else muttered, I saw risk. Naomi nodded. I saw misunderstanding. I saw it turn into dismissal, then into disbelief. But most of all, I saw what it takes to be heard when no one is listening. She passed out 3 papers from her folder. Each page held a true story. A Guatemalan woman in Miami was told to speak English or wait outside after asking for help with directions. A Congolese man was escorted out of a Sky North lounge after staff assumed he was lost, despite holding a platinum card. A deaf teenager fluent in ASL was denied boarding assistance and forced to wait until the next flight. These aren't headlines, Naomi said. They're emails, real ones, from your customers. Last 90 days. No one said a word. She stood up and moved to the screen. What you have here isn't just a public relations problem. It's a recognition problem, a visibility problem, a culture problem. She clicked her USB drive into the panel. Up came her proposal. Window seat, a cultural access dialogue program, Phase 1. 15 pilot conversations between frontline staff and multilingual passengers, first-generation students and youth advocates. No PowerPoints, no training videos, just stories. Objective: build awareness not from compliance, but from empathy. Your crew doesn't need another e-learning module, Naomi said. They need to sit across from someone and realize they've never had to ask for belonging. An older man at the end of the table adjusted his glasses. That's ambitious. Naomi smiled faintly. So was denying me entry into a lounge I had every right to access. The conversation turned. People leaned forward. Sandra nodded. We can start with domestic hubs, JFK, Atlanta, LAX. Let's measure what shifts in staff response after real engagement. Thomas turned to Naomi. Would you be willing to co-lead that rollout? Yes, Naomi said. If we center the voices that get ignored first. After the session ended, most attendees left quietly, some offering genuine handshakes. But Thomas stayed behind. There's someone who asked to see you, he said. Naomi followed him down a quieter hallway to a smaller meeting room, round table, sunlight filtering through blinds. Waiting inside was Marla Quinn. No blazer, no name tag, no wall of authority. She stood when Naomi entered. I asked to speak with you, she said softly. Not for show, for responsibility. Naomi said nothing. I wasn't trained to see someone like you as anything but an exception. That's on me. Naomi's voice was calm. What do you see now? Marla looked her in the eyes. I see someone who reminded me that fluency isn't about accents. It's about awareness. They didn't hug. They didn't shake hands. But Naomi gave a small nod. Keep doing the work, she said. Marla nodded. I am. As Naomi rode the elevator back down, she didn't look at her reflection. She closed her eyes and let the silence hold her. She remembered what it felt like 2 months ago, standing in a different terminal, in a hoodie, holding a boarding pass and being told she didn't belong. She hadn't cried that day, but she'd memorized everything. Today wasn't about erasing that memory. It was about placing it somewhere honest, somewhere it could matter. The elevator dinged. Back on the street, the air smelled like roasted pretzels and cab exhaust. The city was alive in every direction. Naomi stepped toward the curb, pulling out her phone. There were 3 new texts. Mom. How'd it go? Principal Ellis. Just saw you on the internal report. They're lucky to have you in that room. Amira. Tell me you asked the question. The question. Naomi smiled and typed back, I did, and they answered. She slipped the phone into her pocket and paused as a group of tourists passed by, chatting in German and French. She understood every word, and for once, she didn't feel like she was holding a superpower. She felt like she was finally standing in a world ready to catch up. At the crosswalk, a Sky North delivery van passed by. The new ad printed on its side said, Travel isn't just about where you go. It's about who you listen to when you get there. Naomi chuckled to herself. Someone had been paying attention. She stepped off the curb, head high, stride steady. And behind her, the city kept moving, just a little bit more aware. 3 days after the boardroom meeting at Sky North, Naomi sat in her bedroom surrounded by open textbooks, a half-eaten bowl of cereal, and a draft speech on her laptop. She was editing an article for the school paper about language gaps in emergency shelters when her email chimed. The subject line simply read, Invitation, UN Intergovernmental Forum on Digital Language Access. She blinked, then read it again. It wasn't a forwarded article. It wasn't an awareness campaign. It was real. Signed by the Office of the UN Special Envoy on Multilingual Equality. They were inviting her to Geneva as a youth advisor. The forum was less than a month away. Attached was a formal letter with details, accommodations, travel, expectations. But the line that hit hardest came near the end. Your lived insight has become a critical perspective. We believe policy should not be shaped without the voices it impacts most. She sat back slowly, fingers still on the keys. Then she opened her messages and typed one word to her mom, who was in the next room. Can you come here? The living room that evening became mission control. Naomi's mom sat with a legal pad. Her uncle, who worked in nonprofit development, called in via Zoom. Her principal offered to help coordinate school clearance. But through all the logistics and questions, Naomi just sat with the letter in her lap. I thought it would feel bigger, she said finally. Her mom smiled. It is big. You're just not scared of it. Naomi wasn't sure that was true, but she was sure she wasn't backing away from it. Not now. Not when the conversation was finally global. When Naomi landed in Geneva, she was greeted at the airport by a multilingual coordinator holding a sign with her name. The badge clipped to her coat was crisp and official. Delegate, Youth Advisor. The forum was held at the Palais des Nations, a sprawling building of marble and glass. Delegates from over 70 countries had flown in. Academics, ministers, linguists, engineers. Naomi was the youngest registered voice on the docket. That night in her hotel room overlooking Lake Geneva, Naomi reviewed her notes one more time. She had written something simple, not a speech, a story. Because while others came with data, she came with the silence they forgot to measure. The next morning, she entered conference room 4B, where panelists were gathering for the Linguistic Equity in the Digital Age session. As she waited her turn, Naomi listened closely. A tech executive from Sweden talked about AI-driven translation models. A minister from South Africa spoke about rural dialect preservation. An American university researcher proposed a global standard for language rights online. Then the moderator cleared his throat. Our next speaker is someone whose voice, quite literally, shifted the policy conversation. Please welcome Naomi Sinclair. Applause. But Naomi didn't move toward the podium. She stood at her seat instead. No slides, she began. No charts. Just this. She lifted a folded paper. 2 months ago, I was told I didn't belong in a place I had paid to be. Not because of my behavior, but because of my hoodie. A few minutes later, I was solving a crisis no one else in the room could understand. She let the words land. I'm not here because I have credentials. I'm here because I spoke 9 languages when the room spoke none, and because silence was never neutral. It was just overlooked. She told the story of that airport lounge, not as a victim, but as a translator, of language, of expectations, of space. She ended with one ask: don't build tools to empower people like me. Build systems that stop assuming we need permission to speak. This time, the applause lasted longer. After the panel, 3 different delegates approached her, one from Kenya, one from Indonesia, and one from Finland. Each asked if she would consider helping with a regional youth council or digital inclusion campaign. Naomi wasn't used to saying yes right away, so she didn't. Instead, she said, "Let me hear more first," because listening was still her best language. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, in a small community library in Newark, New Jersey, Marla Quinn stood nervously in front of a folding table. A dozen teenagers, immigrant youth from Somalia, Haiti, El Salvador, and Bangladesh, looked up at her. Most of them were there for ESL tutoring. Some were just avoiding the streets. Marla didn't wear a badge. She wasn't paid. She was just present. She held up a short article from a news clipping. Teen girls' language skills change airline policy. She didn't say she knew Naomi, but she said, "Let me tell you what I learned from her." Then, for the first time in her career, Marla taught without a script. Not from a place of knowing, but from a place of admitting she hadn't known enough. And that's when the room listened. Back in Geneva, Naomi sat by the lake the night before her return flight. She had a notebook open, not a speech, just thoughts. On one page, she wrote, "Every system is a language, and most of them are written to keep the same voices in charge." She drew a line under it, then flipped the page and began drafting a new idea, something beyond window seat, something global, a platform where students could log and document real-time exclusion events, mapped by region and tagged by language. A quiet archive, a loud witness. She didn't know what it would be called yet, but she knew it was coming. On her flight back to New York, Naomi sat by the window, her headphones on, but nothing playing. The hum of the plane was enough. She thought about how strange it was that something so small, a boarding pass, a hoodie, could set off a ripple that reached the United Nations. And yet, it had. She didn't feel powerful. She felt aligned, like her voice had finally found its pitch in the choir of something bigger. When she landed, there was a small crowd waiting, her mom, a few classmates, her principal. No balloons, no signs, just pride and presence. The next day at school, her history teacher asked her to share something from the trip. Naomi stood in front of her classmates, backpacks half-zipped, laptops glowing, someone in the back eating chips, and said, "Power isn't who gets the mic. It's who gets remembered when the mic cuts out." Silence. Then someone clapped. Then another. And soon, the classroom didn't feel like a classroom. It felt like a rehearsal for something real. That afternoon, Naomi received a package in the mail. Inside was a small plaque. No trophy, no gold leaf. Just a simple engraving. Naomi Sinclair, Cultural Architect, Geneva Delegate, 2025. Taped to the back was a note. "We don't just thank translators, we follow them." Naomi read it twice. Then she set it on her desk, beside her laptop and a notebook labeled Next Steps. Because the next chapter wasn't just hers, it was already speaking. The first test flight was a Tuesday morning from JFK to LAX. Nothing dramatic, no press, no ribbon cutting, just a regular gate, a regular crew, and a pilot program called Window Seat, quietly going live. The concept was simple. 5 volunteer passengers, students, immigrants, multilingual professionals, had been invited to join pre-boarding conversations with cabin crews. They weren't there to critique, just to talk, about what it felt like to be seen or missed, about the moments when a tone, a glance, or a phrase decided the rest of their journey. Naomi sat in the corner of the break room near Gate 16, sipping a bottle of water, notebook in her lap. She wasn't leading the session. She didn't want to. She was watching, listening. Across from her, a Sky North flight attendant named Luis sat with his arms folded, skeptical but curious. "I mean, I get it," he said. "But sometimes we're just trying to get people seated. Fast. It's not always personal." A woman from Morocco named Amal nodded. "I know, but when I'm holding a boarding pass and someone still asks me, 'Are you sure this is your seat?' It feels personal." Luis looked at her, then looked down. "That's fair." And just like that, it began. Later that afternoon, in the air between New York and California, the shift was subtle but real. A passenger who spoke limited English gestured confusedly at the overhead bin. Instead of brushing him off, a flight attendant paused and said slowly, "Take your time. I'm here." In row 7, a Korean grandmother smiled as another attendant greeted her in basic Hangul, just hello and thank you. But it changed her entire face. In row 14, a teenager wearing a turban was complimented, not questioned, about his seat. Naomi took no notes. She didn't need to. She could see the changes with her eyes. The crew hadn't transformed overnight, but they were trying. Trying looked like eye contact, like questions asked kindly, like space being made without needing an argument first. Back in New York, 2 more airports joined the program, Atlanta and Dallas, then Denver. Within 3 weeks, Sky North reported a 23% drop in formal complaints tied to miscommunication or cultural misunderstanding. One internal report read, "Passengers aren't just less upset, they're surprised, in a good way." At the next debrief, Naomi sat across from a different group of crew. One attendant leaned forward and said, "It's weird. I started hearing your voice in my head, the way you phrased things. It just stuck." Naomi smiled. "That's not my voice. That's yours. You just gave it permission." 2 months in, the ripple effect began to spread outside the airline. A journalist from The Atlantic requested an interview. A transportation equity nonprofit asked Naomi to speak at a summit. Her principal received 3 letters from universities asking if she would consider applying early. Naomi declined the interview. She didn't want to be the headline, but she did accept the summit. At the event, she wore a navy blouse and soft shoes. No blazer, no flash. "I'm not here to tell you a sad story," she said. "I'm here because a system got reprogrammed, not by lawsuits, but by listening, not by fear, but by learning." Her words were posted, shared, quoted. But what she cared most about came later that evening in the form of a direct message. It was from an older flight attendant named Marcus. "I used to think equity training was a checkbox. Today a boy asked if I could teach him how to say hello in 3 languages. I taught him 6. Thank you." Naomi replied with a single word, "Exactly." By the 3rd month, the window seat initiative was no longer a pilot. It was policy. And it wasn't just Sky North. 3 regional carriers had reached out to replicate it. One international airline quietly requested Naomi's slides. They didn't want her name, just the blueprint. And that was exactly what she wanted. One morning, Naomi was walking through JFK on her way to a family trip when she heard it. 2 agents at the check-in counter chatting between passengers. "She doesn't need priority clearance," one said. "She is the reason we even have this system now." Naomi turned her head slightly. They weren't talking to her. They didn't even know she was there. And that's when she knew. This wasn't just her story anymore. It belonged to the system that finally started listening back. That weekend, Naomi sat with her mom on their front steps, sipping tea as the sun dipped low. "You've been quiet," her mom said. Naomi nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" She hesitated, then smiled. "What happens when people start quoting your words back to you, and you realize you weren't just telling your truth? You were naming theirs." Her mom leaned against her shoulder. "You never needed a platform," she said. "You were the message the whole time." They sat in silence, watching the neighbors return home from grocery runs, dog walks, life. In Naomi's pocket was a folded letter, this time from the Department of Transportation. They wanted to pilot a national version of window seat for bus and rail systems. Naomi hadn't answered yet. She would, but not tonight. Tonight, she was content knowing that she had cracked something open and that it was still widening. Not loudly, but permanently. And across the ocean, a young girl in Nairobi stepped into an airport lounge with a boarding pass in one hand, and her head held high. No one stopped her. No one asked if she belonged. And that too was the shift.